of us would love to. There, the recording is in progress. Good. I think we'd all love to be in person, but it's good to be able to do these and to have this recorded so that folks can go back to it if either you get interrupted or you just want to come back to the great information that we're going to get today. I'm Jimmy Kemp. I'm president of the Jack Kemp Foundation. My father was Secretary of HUD from '89 to 1993, and our foundation exists to advance the American idea. And a key part of the American idea is to have stable housing, to be able to live the American dream and to provide for a safe and comfortable place for one person and his or her family. So one of the realities that National Core addresses in its business is not only the need for developing housing, but also the importance of caring for the residents who need various support services. And part of the goal today is to hear about what innovative practices are happening in the world of affordable housing and in development in public housing. I want to tell a quick story that is part of why I started the Jack Kemp Foundation after my dad died in 2009. When he was Secretary of HUD, he had a basic understanding that government should be of, by, and for the people. And as he was the Secretary of HUD, Housing and Urban Development, he understood the core need for having a roof over one's head and the pride that people take in where they live, especially when they have ownership. And so as he was looking at the public housing projects around the country, he started talking to the public housing residents. And one of the cries that he heard and he worked on across the aisle with Democrats, my father was a Republican, but he worked across the aisle on resident management of public housing. And the story of resident management in public housing is a fascinating one because there actually were public housing projects that were turned over to the residents who knew better how to manage their housing projects, which, we don't call them projects anymore, but how to manage those. And he understood that the human desire to care for that place where you live was such that people would improve that which they have more of a stake in. And so that was an innovation in public housing. And certainly we need more innovation in affordable housing today. And that's the goal of this conference. We want you to engage, to ask questions. There's a Q&A button. The chat function of Zoom has been disabled. So please, when you have a question, go ahead and tap the Q&A button in your menu and put that in, and we will have about 40 minutes of panel discussion before we get to, we want to close with about 15, 20 minutes of your questions and then panelists giving answers. So with that, I want to jump into quick introductions. You have the bios for all the panelists who we have today. So we'd love for you to look at those. I want each of the panelists, however, to do a quick introduction of themselves and what they want you to know about their work in under 40 seconds. And I'm the gong show guy. I can't remember if that was Richard Dawson or who, but I'm gonna keep this show moving. So first, we're going to start off with Sharon. Sharon Wilson-Gino, please introduce yourself.
Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Sharon Wilson-Gino. I'm the president of the National Multifamily Housing Council. NMHC is a 2,000 member organization of owners, operators, managers, developers, investors, and folks that support the creation of rental housing in this country. Prior to coming over to NMHC just a couple months ago, I spent most of my 30-year career in and around the affordable space and working both on the advocacy side as well as in affordable housing transactions. So I'm pleased to be here with you today.
Great, thanks, Sharon. Next up, we have Robin Hughes. Robin, you're up.
Hello, everyone. My name is Robin Hughes. I am the president and CEO of the Housing Partnership Network. We are a network of about 110 organizations, affordable housing, multifamily developers, home ownership developers, and community development lending institution, members in all 50 states, serving affordable housing and community development. I am similar to Sharon, I'm in month 9 in this role and really excited about this opportunity. But for 26 and a half years, I was the president and CEO of Abode Communities, which is an affordable housing developer, architect, and property management firm based in Los Angeles, but working throughout the state of California. And I'm really excited to be here with this prestigious panel today to really talk about both the top of mind legislative issues as well as innovation in our sector and utilizing those programs. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Robin. Next up, we have William Russell.
Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be joining you this morning on this panel and representing the Public Housing Authority industry. And in fact, I've been leading the Sarasota Housing Authority now coming up on 18 years. And prior to that, I was working in the affordable housing field in Washington, D.C. For about 6 years, including serving as a Deputy Assistant Secretary at HUD in the Public and Indian Housing Division.
Great, thank you, William. And last but not least, we have Greg Bradbard.
Thanks, Jimmy. Good morning, everybody. Greg Bradbard. I'm Senior Vice President for National Core and also the President of our Hope Through Housing Foundation. National Core is a national affordable housing developer. We build, we do construction, we do property management, and then our Hope Through Housing Foundation provides all of our on-site services. In total, we have a little over 90 apartment communities throughout the country, California, Florida, and Texas, and house about 25,000 residents. And I look forward to sharing a little bit more with you later on in the webinar.
Great. So just a reminder, if you've come on a little bit late, we've just done introductions, and we want your questions for the panelists, which we'll cover in the last quarter of this session. There's a Q&A button on your menu, and hopefully you can find that and submit questions as we go, and we're hoping to get to them as many as we can. So Sharon, we wanted to start with you and talk about what's going on in Congress from a policy perspective. What does the landscape look like? We know that housing is not always the top policy priority in the various Congress sessions that we have, but all of us have hope springs eternal. And what's the landscape look like in Congress right now for housing policy issues?
Sure. Thanks, Jimmy. And I think you're absolutely right. Housing has not always been a top of mind issue in Congress, unfortunately. But I have to say, it has never been more top of mind than it is today. And I've been doing this work for a long time. It's exciting to see that housing is on the lips of federal lawmakers, state lawmakers, local lawmakers, and it's a kitchen table issue for voters. So we do have some energy around the fact that we need some new solutions for housing. At the same time, our housing situation has never been worse, particularly at the affordable side of the spectrum. In terms of the political landscape, having a Republican-controlled House and a Democratic-controlled Senate, and having those thin margins on both sides, does sometimes make it difficult. But at the same time, like you, hope springs eternal. There are few issues in this nation that are more bipartisan, at least in my view, than housing. People
Right.
of every political persuasion, of every economic status, of every color and every creed need to live someplace in a civil society. And frankly, as a government, we have not always done a very good job of making that happen. There are a number of proposals on the table right now. And again, keep in mind the congressional session is young. We have a lot of new members. They just got organized back in January, so they're still introducing bills. But last month I had the chance to testify before the Senate Finance Committee. So that one of the first things they took up was an affordable housing hearing focused on improvements to the low-income housing tax credit, which is a solution that has been tried and true over many years, as well as looking at a middle income tax credit and looking at other tax incentives, as well as subsidies incentives. We need a little bit of everything to allow localities to use different federal tools in partnership with state and local governments to create the housing supply that we need in order to house our people. We just simply do not have enough housing for the growing population that we have.
So LIHTC, as you said, has been an effective tool. Robin, would you expound on kind of your perspective on what policy prescriptions stand a chance, expanding LIHTC or middle income tax credits? But Robin, share some of the nitty gritty that you're seeing that gives you hopefully some hope about what Congress is doing on housing policy.
Thank you, Jimmy, for that question. So as many in our audience know, the low-income housing tax credit program that was established in the mid-1980s has been a critical part of financing and developing affordable housing in this country. And this panel is called Innovation in Affordable Housing. And for the time that the credit was created in the mid-90s, it absolutely transformed the way in which this sector produces and delivers affordable housing and the whole financing ecosystem in which we work in. But what we're seeing is that the credit itself is not keeping up with inflation in terms of what's available. And we're also seeing that the supply and availability of pipeline far exceeds the availability of the credit. And as Sharon mentioned, that we continue to have this severe shortage of affordable housing across the nation. So, before Congress is legislation to both expand and strengthen the low-income housing tax credit program, which would lead to the production of over, I believe, 2 million homes over the next 10 years. So it's pretty significant. The increase in the 9% program would help to address what we're seeing in the sector as increases in cost and inflation associated with that, whereas the fix related to the private activity bonds and the 4% credit would really just unleash more access and capacity in financing affordable housing. What we hear from our members, and probably what we hear from across the sector, is that, despite the pandemic, they are maintaining the strongest pipelines that they've ever had, so that there is plenty of supply out there, and that by strengthening the program, we actually get the production of more units more quickly. So both keeping up with the inflation, but also getting these pipelines through, and I think that's really important. The bills that are sitting in Congress have had bipartisan support, both within the Senate and the House, with a significant number of U.S. senators and congressional representatives serving as co-sponsor of the legislation. And we could definitely see a significant increase. The other thing that I have found with the low-income housing tax credit program, or our members have, is that it has evolved and allowed for innovation in the sector, whether it is how we produce and deliver affordable housing and alternative construction models, or who we're serving in permanent supportive housing as well. So it is really critical for us to see the passage of these bills that are focused on both increasing and strengthening the tax credit program, because it's critical to unleash supply and to address the severe crisis that we face in our country.
Before we go on to William, Robin, and or Sharon, can one of you talk about the Neighborhood Homes Act and expound on that a little bit?
Yes, yeah, I would love to address that, and Sharon, I ask you to join me as well. The National Housing Investment Act, it is a similar tax credit for homeownership. So, I think it could do for the homeownership space what the low-income housing tax credit did for the rental space. And it is an opportunity to, yes, increase the home ownership rate in this country, but it also addresses the low rate within low income communities of color in terms of home ownership. It addresses the fact that we have this mismatch between the value and the cost of building in those communities. And it creates an opportunity to bring new capital to mission-based affordable housing developers in the home ownership space to increase home ownership across the board. So this could really transform the way in which we finance home ownership in communities, whether it's urban, suburban, or rural. And again, continue to create, innovation in terms of how we deliver home ownership opportunities. Another bill that has bipartisan support, both within the Senate and the House. And it's a way of also just attracting private capital into communities as well and addressing affordable housing.
Completely agree, Robin. Anytime home ownership and multifamily need to work together. And so for way too long, people have seen those as very separate pieces. But if we want to rebuild communities and truly create housing equity in this country, you need communities that have some of both. And this particular bill, I think, does a nice job of being effectively the first incentive in, particularly in distressed communities that have long been overlooked by investors. And it creates an opportunity for people in that community to start on a home ownership path of making that community ready for other kinds of amenities, including more multifamily, including more retail, and including more schools and other things that will support healthy communities moving forward. Again, we're growing as a nation. The bottom line is we had 300 million people in 2012. We're going to have 400 million people by mid-century. That is a huge population growth in a very short period of time. Therefore, we cannot afford to ignore and disinvest in neighborhoods and just leave them fallow. We need the land, we need the opportunity to be close to jobs and other things. And this is one vehicle for doing it. And as you point out, it does have bipartisan support, and it too should be something that can get passed, I hope, in this Congress, despite the polarization on other issues. Again, this is a bipartisan issue.
And I want to build on the complementary part of our federal program. So yes, the low-income housing tax credit program supports rental production. We have the new markets tax credit program that encourages the production of economic development activities, whether it's retail, community facilities, healthcare, and bringing in this home ownership tax credit, especially into these targeted neighborhood, I think is a good tool for tying all of that together. So we're addressing rental needs, home ownership needs, economic development needs. It's also, as we think about affirmatively furthering fair housing, there's a lot of focus on getting federal resources and creating opportunities in high resource neighborhoods. But the other part of that is revitalizing and investing in lower income neighborhoods. And the housing, this Neighborhood Homes Investment Act credit, it does exactly that. It is a revitalization tool. I also think it will help, small and especially builders of color develop within communities where they're working. So it's a small business tool as well, and as we've talked about, a wealth building tool. So great opportunity to complement the other federal programs we have that support housing and community development.
Thank you. So, and we're going to come back to you two on the issue of skyrocketing rents. And obviously there are a lot of market pressures, and inflation is hard to keep up with. And fast increasing rents they're a huge challenge. So we're going to look for opportunities there. I want to move on to William really quickly. William, coming from HUD and being in a public housing authority, I'm in DC. I just read the Washington Post yesterday, and the DC Housing Authority, where Adrian Todman was, who's now at HUD, but DC Housing Authority continues to have challenges and problems. And you've got your finger on the pulse of public housing authorities and the challenges there, and the interaction with HUD, and how public housing can be approved in some of the innovative programs that have been tried, like RAD. But William, would you give us your overview of public housing from your perspective down in Florida, of being at a public housing authority and knowing a lot of the challenges in dealing with HUD and vice versa?
Sure. Thank you, Jimmy. I'd be happy to. Briefly.
Yeah, easy, right?
Yeah.
Do it quick.
This gets complicated, but I'm gonna skim through some important stuff that's going on in our industry. The dominant trend in our industry right now is really to reposition our aging, undercapitalized public housing assets, and basically essentially leave the public housing program for what has historically proven to be a more effective rental assistance program, which is Section 8. And so there's a lot of different tools that Congress and HUD have allowed housing authorities to pursue to reposition. And I'm going to certainly touch on a few of those, including RAD. But basically, part of the repositioning is to exit the public housing program for a myriad of reasons, but one of the primary reasons is to leverage assets to really finance the necessary rehab or the redevelopment of our aging public housing stock. And when we redevelop public housing, we typically partner with a private developer and then utilize what was just discussed, the low-income housing tax credit program, to primarily finance the new development. And in Florida, where a lot of people seem to be moving these days, the tax credits are in really high demand and short supply. So we could literally apply for years before we secure those tax credits, which are critical to redeveloping.
Mm.
When we partner with with our private developer partner and redevelop these public housing sites, we rarely build back, new public housing in the mix. Typically, we will use our own Section 8 vouchers, and many times we will project base those vouchers in the new developments to continue to have, a deeply affordable, deeply subsidized units in the mix. But in almost every case now, it is a mix of incomes. It's not 100% concentrated, extremely low income people all in one development. That has not proven to be financially or socially very viable. And then, so I do want to talk about RAD. RAD is the rental assistance demonstration. And we all do call it RAD for short. It's been around over 10 years now. It's been very effective in converting public housing to Section 8 and unlocking the value of those assets and leveraging private funds to complete the rehab. If you're a housing authority of public housing, you will never, ever get a bank to underwrite a loan to help rehab your property. They would never even know how to underwrite public housing property because of how it's funded and financed. But under RAD, housing authorities have leveraged $15 billion in construction improvements to their properties. Interestingly enough, Congress has raised the statutory cap of how many units can be converted under RAD numerous times. Right now, the cap is at 455,000 units. We're hoping that Congress could either eliminate the cap altogether or even consider lifting the demonstration aspect of what, again, has proven to be a very effective program over time.
It's only been 10 years, William. Come on.
Yeah, I know. I know. We have some very long lasting demonstrations, but in this case, I think it could be made, a permanent program and lift that cap. There's a number of other repositioning programs I could get into, but probably don't have time. But I did want to mention one innovative deal that we just completed in our downtown urban core, which is where, again, we partnered with a private developer. We secured 9% tax credits, but then we decided to go above and beyond the affordable light tech units to do some really much needed workforce units, again, in the downtown urban core. And we were able to get funds, millions of dollars from the city, as well as 2 private foundations. And that was kind of the innovative part of that, where we were able to leverage a lot more money to build an additional 52 workforce units, where we capped those at 100% of median income. And we targeted those 52 to hometown heroes. So these are people who are providing a critical service in the community, but literally couldn't afford to live in downtown Sarasota. Police, fire, EMS, teachers, nurses, childcare workers. So that's been a successful development, leased up very quickly. And so
What do you call that again, William? What's that called?
well, we call it Lofts on Lemon. That's the name of the development, but it's really kind of blending a typical light tech development with locally funded, community funded workforce units as well. So it's a blend of affordable and attainable workforce housing all in one. And it was a great development, and it's been really well received in our community.
Yeah, well, that's a great segue to Greg. At the KEP Foundation, as I mentioned at the beginning, our goal, our mission is to advance the American idea. And we believe the American idea is the human idea, that humans are created to flourish, to improve, and that there's not a station in life to which anyone is born. We each have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And a key part of that is progressing. I've got a 24-year-old son. We're finally about to get him out of the house. You can say a prayer for that. So our 24-year-old, he's proud, and he's working, he's getting paid. Greg, you all at CORE have really invested a lot into helping residents who have various levels of assistance tap into their skill set, helping make sure that they get equipped so that they too can flourish, so they can develop. And that's what everybody who's in the, anything welfare related, government assistance related, nobody wants to trap people in welfare. We want to help people have a safe place to live, but we also want them to be incentivized to invest in themselves. So I know you all have really focused on that, and William was talking about just that. But Greg, can you talk about how you and CORE are really making progress in that area?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well stated, Jimmy. And, at National Core and the Hope Through Housing Foundation, the way I like to describe it is we have a shared mission to use affordable housing as a platform to elevate the health, the well-being, and the self-sufficiency of our residents. So exactly what you're talking about. Our goal is not only providing the sticks and bricks, but really the people who can surround our residents to give them the support that they need to be able to identify, reach their goals for their kids as well. So I'm gonna mix it up and share my screen to share a couple slides.
Cool. Great.
And hopefully, can you all see that?
Yes.
You're good. So I'm going to try to touch on really quickly just 4 kind of best practices that National Core uses, and also some ideas to share with others. We consider innovative, but we also consider to be effective practices in terms of really empowering residents and creating more affordable housing as well. So the first one is, is really on, resident services specifically. We offer these different programs, which you can see, programs we call Building Bright Futures for our kids, which is after school programs, it's teen clubs, our Pathways program with this really economic mobility training. So that's one-on-one financial counseling, that's group financial education focused on employment and also money management. It's health and wellness for our seniors. And then finally, would be more intensive case management for special needs populations, including homeless, veterans, those with developmental disabilities, and the like. But what we know is that there's not enough funding in order to provide these types of services on our properties and across affordable properties across the country. We know this year, our nation will invest about $8 billion in new affordable housing development. Yet the funding available for resident services in those developments is very limited. The limited funding that does exist through HUD for the Family Self-Sufficiency Program and the Senior Service Coordinator grants are limited primarily to Public Housing Authority or those with other HUD funding on them, which means the many, many units that have been developed through low-income housing tax credit over the last several decades are not eligible for those dollars. So we are encouraged. We have seen some movement through Congress. So this last year, Congressman Pete Aguilar did introduce HR 6602, which did result in a small demonstration project for resident services in affordable housing. But we'd also like to see an expansion of that, but also an expansion of eligibility for LIHTC programs or low-income housing tax credit units to also be eligible for some of those HUD funds as well. So huge need on that front. Something else we just launched along these lines is really matching the need for more individuals as we continue to build more affordable housing. There's more jobs there. There's a whole industry to manage, both through the leasing and the maintenance side. And we also have residents needing jobs and job skills. So we've created recently what we call Core Academy. Core Academy is a workforce development training program. We're just launching it, piloting right now. We're partnering with our local community college, Chaffey College, where this will be a part of their program. But the idea is to introduce residents in affordable housing and other low-income individuals in the community into the industry or the career field of property management. So we're excited about doing that. We know there's other innovative programs like this, but really focused on developing workforce skills. Again, as Jimmy was saying, using affordable housing as a platform to help them move toward that American dream. I'm going to shift for a second to, how do we?
And Greg, you've got 1 minute left.
Okay, I'm going to need 2.
1:30.
Okay, there you go. So I want to touch on housing and health partnerships really quickly. So one of the things, we're looking at a lot is other outside entities that can help us develop additional units using non-federal sources. One of those are healthcare partners. Many of you probably know the social determinants of health, which basically says, hey, look, if you ask a doctor, what impacts one's health, they're going to say what happens in a doctor's office is maybe 10%. The other 90% are all these other things that are happening in their life, their family, their environment, their culture. Housing is a huge one of those. If you don't have housing at the base of that to provide that platform, very difficult for somebody to stay healthy, both physically and mentally. Our healthcare systems are recognizing that, starting to see more healthcare managed plans, also healthcare systems investing in affordable housing. We have a couple of partnerships that have invested in our projects to help us develop additional units. That includes Common Spirit Health, Aetna and CVS, and also our local managed healthcare program as well. And then I'm going to wrap up because I know Jimmy's pushing me here on the last one. Another way that we're working to really leverage the LIHTC funding is attracting additional capital from the private markets, from Wall Street and others. So last year, National Core did go out and get an S&P or a Standard & Poor's rating. We got an A+ credit rating. And we're now, there's a handful of other affordable housers throughout the country that have done this and growing. We encourage other affordable developers to also get their S&P rating. As a result of that, we were able to issue a $100 million bond, which now will allow us to strengthen and expand our portfolio as well. Last thing I'm just going to hit really quick is we're also looking at tax code enhancements as well. We know that there are additional ways that we could really leverage the asset of affordable housing and also encourage other market rate of apartment owners to be able to make contributions if we were able to make some changes to the tax code to incentivize and remove some of the barriers, particularly around the recapture of depreciation. So a lot there, but a lot of opportunity.
That's great. Thank you. I think we've got a question that's also going to tie into that. But I want to go back to Sharon and Robin and have you all talk about just the way rents are rising and the pressures that puts on both people and then developers and collecting. And so can you talk about skyrocketing rents and what can be done about it?
Sure. We in the rental housing industry, we really saw a latent COVID impact.
Yeah.
While during COVID and costs were going up dramatically, you saw that at the gas pump immediately. You saw it at your grocery store immediately. You didn't see it in the cost of providing housing so much because people were under year leases. So owners of property were really absorbing some of those additional costs in real time. And then coupled with that was the eviction moratorium that was issued by the federal government. So you have these two things happening sort of simultaneously, taking a bad situation and making it worse. When the eviction moratorium was lifted and people's leases started turning over, you were seeing the impact of those costs that had been sort of pent up affecting rents. And we saw a really particularly acute spike last summer. That has since fallen down, and as the market has sort of resettled itself, I think we're seeing, and more supply has come on the market as well, particularly at the Class A space, not nearly enough on the affordable side. We're seeing those rents nationally come down and starting to stabilize a little bit. That being said, there's been some reactionary move in many local jurisdictions, as well as some reaction on the federal government's part to look at rent control and rent stabilization issues. While that's a politically expedient seeming solution, there's just decades of research that shows that ultimately those kinds of political solutions do not help the very people they're intended to help. Because ultimately they result in disinvestment in housing and communities that need it the most. So we are very focused on educating people about what rent control, while it sounds good, especially at this time when we've seen some spikes, really has the unintended consequence of hurting rental housing and really focusing on supply. What are the solutions at the federal level, like we talked about before, but at the state and local level as well? And William, I'm interested in your perspectives on this. You know, the state of Florida just passed this Live Local law, which is a really exciting opportunity where they're stepping up to the plate and trying to remove barriers in zoning in different communities to building more housing, putting their money where their mouth is and allocating almost $1 billion of new funding to support various types of housing, and then saying, look, rent control is not a solution across the board. I think the other danger in rent control initiatives too is I think ultimately it impacts lower income people in communities of color. If people disinvest in communities that adopt rent stabilization initiatives, people with private dollars will not invest in those communities as heavily. Quality will go down, and the people that are trying to get into the rental market won't have access. And that's, I think, something that we have to look 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, and be good stewards of housing policy today.
So can we go to William real quick before we come back
Sure.
to Robin? William,
Sure.
can you answer what Sharon was saying?
Well, yeah, she covered it pretty well, but yeah, the Senate president here, really sponsored a pretty big housing bill, and it does have a lot of new funding in it, and it does really challenge local governments to find ways to incentivize and get the private developers involved in producing some of the affordable housing. So we'll see if they're able to do that, but you know, certainly zoning is a big part of that. And I've been in discussions with my city and my county about, you know, how to go about doing that. You know, it's a major effort. So
Thank you. Robin, to you on,
Yeah.
on rents and
Yeah, so I think we would all agree that before the pandemic, we were seeing rising increases in rent, and the pandemic, as you know, we've just heard, only added to that. But it's also interesting to see where these skyrocketed rents are happening. So, you know, you think about places like LA, I'm sitting in Boston today, or San Francisco and New York, and those, you know, types of hot markets are experiencing skyrocketed prices.
Florida, number one.
But yeah, but now it's, you know, it's Florida is number one, Tennessee, North Carolina. You know, we were in Pittsburgh recently at a member meeting in a city that is now talking about gentrification and skyrocketing rent. So I also think it's about looking at where this is occurring, but ultimately it comes back to supply and where we're producing housing. The fact that, you know, for decades, we've just have not produced enough housing at any level to address the population growth that we have in our country and, you know, throughout the cities. We definitely are not seeing housing produced at a level significant to make it affordable to the low to moderate income ranges. So there definitely needs to be an increased focus on how do we create more supply out there. And we've already talked about those federal incentives, whether it's the low income housing tax credit or a home ownership tax credit, or, you know, even the middle income tax credit as a way of producing that supply. And, you know, I always have this image in my mind of this sort of continuum of housing needs that we have in this country, ranging from addressing our significant homeless crisis. So building bridge housing, building shelters, building supportive housing, and on the, you know, other side, continuing to make sure we have home ownership opportunities. And how are we addressing that from, you know, a dollar amount, you know, how much does it really cost to do that? And what is the role of the private market, but also each levels of government to put those resources out there to support the production at all levels of government, but in particular where the market isn't going to address production, which is on the low to moderate income side. So just focusing on policy that is going to stimulate and accelerate production of affordable housing in the places that we need in this country. And the other part, and Sharon hit on this, is that we have to think about the system in which we produce, making it easier for housing production to happen, reducing some of the barriers related to land use approvals, and things like that, so that we can increase production overall. So the only way that we can address our, you know, our skyrocketing rent problem is by producing more housing. And investing, especially federal government or government investing, intervening in the right place to make sure we're producing at the low and moderate income level.
And I have no doubt that government needs to invest. Yes, we all want government to spend effectively and efficiently, and invest is a tough word when it comes to government, because government doesn't always invest great. So I want to take the first question from the audience, which is about private equity into you know, affordable housing. So Greg, why don't you talk about what you all are seeing in terms of attracting private equity into this space? What are you seeing? What do you think is coming? How can we shine a greater light on the opportunities that have government assistance? And how can that all come together? How is it coming together? What needs to improve?
Sure. Yeah, so I touched on a few of them. You know, one is really, you know, the use of an S&P rating and attracting dollars from, you know, private equity markets, you know, can really be really effective in that way, using the bond offering and such. Something else we've talked about as well is if affordable housing actually became an investment class, would make it easier for institutional investors to invest in the development of affordable housing. And then the other one I want to touch on a little bit more is kind of that tax code issue that I was alluding to. And what we know is that there are many current market rate apartment owners that have highly appreciated assets. They have apartment complexes that they've held onto for years, and know that if they sell those, they've depreciated those assets to a point that they're going to have a recapture of depreciation on that when they sell it, which will provide a large tax bill. And as a result of that, many of those individuals don't sell those properties and end up holding on to them until death. Well, then that's waived essentially. A really innovative idea would be, if we could change, tax codes such that that property could be donated to a nonprofit or other organization that would use it for affordable purposes with a covenant on it long term. We would instantly increase many additional affordable units. It would benefit that donor, if you will, and would be a great way to attract essentially the capital through not just dollars, but the actual housing units in that way. So just a couple of thoughts there.
Let's not forget, I also want to mention in terms of attracting equity, for the low-income housing tax credit program, a lot of the investors are banks.
Absolutely.
And part of the reason they're investing, in addition to getting a dollar for dollar, income tax credit, corporate income tax credit in return, their CRA needs are also driving some of that investment.
Right.
So that's an important thing to not lose sight of as well.
CRA, the Community Revitalization Act.
Correct.
Right.
Reinvestment Act.
Reinvestment Act. Yeah. Does anybody have any quick data on the returns that some private equity investors have gotten? Are there any stories that come to mind quickly that that illustrate the opportunity?
To Jimmy, when our members have looked to the private market, and that includes social investment funds as well, the expected returns are still in the double digits. It's not single digit returns. It's just, 19, 20, 22%. So that attracting that private market, capital to support, moderate income, that middle income types of housing that we want to produce. I think that is an absolutely great avenue for that. And when Greg talked about, National Core getting their S&P rating, it was another way of going out to the private market to get low-cost capital to either invest in existing housing and or to develop new housing opportunities. So, but the expected returns are market rate returns. And so we have to think about what type of housing that then produces.
Completely agreed. And I think that's something that's getting lost in this conversation. On one hand, and I heard some of this at the Senate hearing I recently testified at, on one hand, there's a recognition that government does not largely pay for housing. Government has invested well in defense spending. Government has invested well in transportation spending. It has not invested well in housing. So it must rely on private market capital. But on the other hand, there isn't I don't think on the part of a lot of lawmakers, a full understanding that if you're going to rely on private market capital and you're not going to put federal dollars in what's needed to make the housing system go, particularly at the low income end, you're going to pay market rate returns. They come with market rate restrictions. They come with all sorts of things. Then we can complain about that. But what's the solution to the question? We need more supply. We need the resources to leverage that supply. And our option is the private market if the federal government isn't going to support it. Even on the subsidy side, the tax credit is great, but we need to expand it because we don't have enough of it. On the subsidy side, 1 in 4 Americans that needs and is eligible for any kind of assisted housing gets it. In the healthcare side, if you're eligible, you get it. In schools, if you're eligible, you get it.
You get it.
Nutrition assistance, if you're eligible, you get it. But this is a place where we don't do that. So I think that there needs to be some rebalancing of what people understand, that we are in the private market to stay because government hasn't supported it in the way it needs to be supported.
Interesting. Can we talk really quickly about the middle income? We have a question from the audience, the middle income housing tax credit. And if that's there to address the people in the lower middle income bracket. And is Congress more interested or less interested compared to LIHTC? Which one kind of has more interest right now?
I don't think these are I think these are continuum. They're not mutually exclusive. The LIHTC program is tried and true, and the Improvement Act has been around since 2021, and I think it's ready to go. The MyTech proposal is something Senator Wyden has worked with us and other industry representatives on for the last year or so. It fixes that problem between 80 and 120% of AMI, where a number of those households are increasingly cost burdened, and it provides a vehicle for creating that quote missing middle. And there's been a lot of research done on the fact that while we have market rate investors interested in the high end of the spectrum, we have some government programs, not nearly enough on the lower end of the spectrum, but we're not building enough housing in between. So MyTech is one vehicle building on the LIHTC program to leverage some capital for that type of housing as well.
Yeah. So it's an and, not a but, or but. So they truly do have to come together and be equal in priority. And I think that is the fear of the sector, is that if you advocate for the middle income tax credit, it means it's going to take away from the low income housing tax credit. So, you know, this investment in affordable housing, and this is one way the federal government does invest in affordable and moderate income housing. It has to be across the income levels. And, you know, as we've talked about, there continues to be a need to expand the low income housing tax credit just to cover the cost inflation that we've experienced, and hopefully then increase the supply. But the middle income is really to do exactly what we've talked about. The market now, because of the high cost of building and the high rents associated with that middle income people cannot even afford to be in the rental market because rents are so high. And this tax credit will allow you to reduce that cost gap and the affordability gap within the middle income market. It's addressing a solution that the market in and of itself is not going to solve. So I think we hope it is a package deal, that we're not, and it's all through, because we've talked about the Neighborhood Improvement Act. That is just another tool that is needed to create this housing supply. We've been really asked to address this severity in our nation's housing shortage and we've been under-resourced, undersupplied, under-resourced as a sector. And we're never going to get ahead of it unless there is both a public intervention strategy, as well as taking advantage of the private market as much as possible and incentivizing the private market to invest in housing.
Greg, do you have something to say real quick?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I think, you know, something that was touched on at the beginning of our conversation was, you know, around home ownership as well. And I think that that's a really important piece as well, that if truly what we want to do is use housing, you know, to break the generational cycle of poverty. We know that, you know, home ownership has been America's greatest wealth building tool for generations. And we have, you know, many people have not had that opportunity. So I also think that, you know, the continued investment in housing specifically for the purpose of home ownership, first-time home ownership, for those who have not had that opportunity previously, is a large part of the equation as well.
So William, we've got some Hill staffers who are working on housing policy and public housing policy. What do you want to close with and make sure that they know that they should be aware of, thinking about? What's on your mind that you would like to have on these staffers' minds?
Like I said, I think making it easier for housing authorities to reposition these kind of historically underfunded, undercapitalized public housing assets. They can be real assets. Even the land that they're on are huge assets for our communities.
Yeah.
And so, like, one of the big ways that we do that is we apply to this special application center at HUD under Section 18 is what it's known as. And right now, Congress has made it pretty difficult to, I guess, qualify for that. You basically have to jump over a bunch of hoops and prove that the development is obsolete in order for HUD to give you permission to redevelop. So I think that process could be made easier to do, and then just continuing to support these other repositioning tools, including RAD, maybe not having that as a demonstration anymore, or lifting the cap, as I mentioned. So those are positives, and just continuing to support the Section 8 voucher program in general, even multifamily Section 8. These are really effective programs, and they provide a huge resource in our communities. I mean, the voucher program, if you were to call around housing authorities in Florida, most of us, our wait lists are closed. You can't even submit an application for a voucher because there's so much demand to get a voucher, and our wait lists are so long that we're not even taking them we open up our wait lists every like 4 or 5 years, basically.
Yeah.
So if Congress could, continue to provide some new vouchers into our communities, that would really help address some of the need as well.
Great, thank you. We've got 3 minutes. William, that was your closing minute. Sharon, you've got a closing minute. What does this audience need to know? What do you want to leave them with closing it out?
Echo much of what was already said, but if you do one thing and you want to take credit for doing something on a bipartisan basis, the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Improvement Act is an easy place to go. It has been vetted. It is a tried and true program. It's not going to solve all of our problems, but it's a good place to start. And as Robin points out, there is a whole series of other tools in the toolbox that the federal government can implement, both through the tax code as well as through the subsidy programs, as William points out, to make housing work in state and local governments. So this is a bipartisan place where people can make a difference.
Awesome. Robin, you're up.
So I'll echo what Sharon just said about a bipartisan approach. I would like us to begin to think about a national housing strategy that is not Congress to Congress and administration to administration, but where we can get long-term support for a national housing strategy that looks at that continuum of housing needs, and where we can incentivize the private market to engage. Let's do that. But where we really need to think about how government supports, intervenes, and invests at all levels, having a strategy for that to work. So that would be my takeaway from this.
Great. Greg?
I agree with the others. I agree with Robin. Absolutely, the continuum of housing, and then I'd say also the continuum of services that would accompany that housing, so that we really do use it as a platform to elevate the well-being of the residents who are living there.
So I want to thank all of you panelists. I want to encourage the audience to check out their bios, get to know their organizations. Feel free to reach out to them. Thank you to National Core for hosting this. And I want to take my moderator privilege to leave you with one thought. Yes, housing is a bipartisan issue. The fundamental underlying issue is that our nation needs to be a growing, expanding economy. We need jobs. We've got to have economic policies that lay the groundwork for true economic growth, so that there are more jobs. One policy that intended to do that, and it's had mixed results, but I think it can be improved, is opportunity zones from the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. But I couldn't be on a panel like this and be a camp and not talk about the importance of economic growth and what that enables the folks who care about affordable housing to do when there are more job opportunities, people are making more money, and they can get on that path out, especially if there are great companies like National Core who are doing a great job with services tied to housing. So I leave you with that. Thanks for indulging me. Mike, thanks for hosting us, and panelists, thank you so much. Thank you all out there for listening, and we hope you follow up and that this was helpful. All right, have a great day and a good week.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, Jimmy.